Wouldn't it be great to have an amazing sales journey at your landscape company? I mean, close all kinds of deals, have a process that really works, and build rapport with prospective clients. That's what we all want. You want sales to come easier with less frustration and to get you the ideal clients. The problem is you're kryptonite. What do I mean by that? There's something that is zapping your strength as a salesperson in the landscape industry, and deals fall apart even when you don't even know it. So, what is this kryptonite? Well, that's today's topic for our podcast. Today's episode is called For Preparation, the Landscaping Sales Kryptonite. Welcome to the Landscape Leadership Podcast. My name is Chad Diller, and I'm your host. And if you are in the green industry and you love candid conversations about sales and marketing, guess what? You're in the right place. So before we get started today, let me kind of give you a little bit of background for those of you that don't know much about my history. So I've been working in the green industry for over 25 years, and I have done a lot of things. I've done the work, I've sold the work for a while, so I get it. This is not always easy. Plus, we get kind of in these ruts where we think that, our sales process is good, our skills are really great, we know our people, we know how to close deals, but we can always improve, right? So I have joining me today to add to the flavor of this conversation, I have TM Dickinson. So TM, hey, how are you doing today?
Hey, Chad, how are you?
Great. So I'll give you a little background on TM. So we kind of met each other about 4 or 5 years ago. TM was working as a fractional VP of sales for one of our clients, which is a really high-end design build company. Also do like the full service kind of estate maintenance. So they close not a huge volume of deals, but the deals that they close are worth a lot of money. And so TM joined the team fractionally to help their team fix their process, fix their skills, and to get even better. And we kind of intersected in that point because we had enabled some digital sales tools for their team to use. And TM just happened to be using these as well so that he could measure the performance and track what their team is doing. And so we've had a chance to interact over the years. He managed their team to be more effective. They've seen a lot of progress, so I brought him on today. So TM, why don't you give the audience a little bit of a background bigger than that one little instance? What have you been doing in your career?
Oh, certainly will. Thank you, Chad, for having me.
Sure.
It is TM Dickinson. It's not Tim. I am Southern, but there are no vowels in my first name.
Everybody's wondering what TM stands for. Every time I go to type this, it wants to autocorrect it to like the
yeah,
trademark. My Google Doc does that every single time. So
yeah.
I'm not sure your name is trademarked, but
I'm, I'm,
don't
I'm
want to
I'm
tell
the
us what
third.
TM's for, or
I'm the third Thomas Morrison
okay.
Dickinson.
All right.
Yeah. But pleased to be here. Like I said, I have been in sales management for 32 years, and I worked for both a Fortune 100 company. I was in the wireless business. I built wireless telephone systems, and I sold and managed the direct sales teams and retail sales teams for an organization called Alltel that was ultimately sold to Verizon. I worked for them for about a dozen years, and then I went to work for a small local manufacturer here in Virginia called Cadence. In that period of time, I worked for them for 16 years. It's a 20-year-old company, was doing $14 million in revenue. I managed all aspects of sales and marketing. And we sold that business in 2018 to private equity, and we had revenues of $105 million. I left in 2020 for a couple of reasons. Sometimes working for private equity companies is not super fun. I was getting dragged into areas of the business that I did enjoy, which was really around creating the same sales reports for some different subset of the board in three different formats. What I loved was being with the clients and loved being with my customers. And I'd always wanted to work for myself. And I just figured a couple things were true. One was that sales issues are industry agnostic, and that there were probably a lot of sales owners, sole proprietors out there in different markets that didn't like managing salespeople because they didn't enjoy it or they weren't particularly good at it. And I thought I could fill that niche and not have to live on an airplane anymore and just kind of work in mainly in the mid-Atlantic and the Southeast, which was good for me. So I hung out my own shingle. I became a fractional VP of sales or a fractional sales manager. And again, focusing on sole proprietors that have fewer than 100 employees and somewhere in the range of $3 to $20 million in revenue on an annual basis. And interestingly, my first client was was in the landscape design build market in Lynchburg, Virginia. And they introduced me to something called integrity selling. And I have read lots of different business books in my career, particularly sales management books. And I've never met one that couldn't have been a terrific article. You know, they were all some kind of long-winded and not really practical. So I'm thankful that they introduced me into integrity selling. And I'm also very thankful that they've gotten me involved in working in the green industry. So since working with that one landscape design and construction firm, I've acted as a VP of sales for 3 additional ones. And I've trained 8 different landscape design build companies and maintenance businesses in 2024 in integrity selling. And I just find it to be practical and very, very helpful in improving close percentages.
Okay. Well, thanks. Before we start unpacking these tips, we're talking about poor preparation. I want to talk about, there's someone probably listening right now that's saying, you know what, I'm pretty prepared. Like what I got going on, I've been doing this for 20, 30 years. I know how to go into conversations. I know the pieces of information I'm supposed to be getting when I go in there, and I feel pretty good about that. We love to like stir the pot. So like we want to challenge you if you're listening or watching this that maybe you could do a lot better and learn something new, an old dog with new tricks. Maybe you're new to the industry. Maybe you think you know what it is to prepare. So why would you say that people that are watching this, like what are they doing that really isn't all that prepared to begin with?
Well, that's a good question. I would just encourage everybody on the podcast to think about how many sales interactions they've had in their life, and then to try to classify how many good sales interactions they had in their life. It's fair to say that they probably had very poor sales interactions with seasoned salespeople that have been in the industry for a number of years. And I think that that comes down to the sales folks probably winging it. Not probably, they're winging it. They come in unprepared. They think that all clients are the same. They think that the way that they approach the way they approach the client is the only way to do it. That the features of their product are something that the client cares about, which is definitely not true. What the client cares about is how those features are going to benefit them. And they often go in with something that's going to be more of a template. Imagine somebody comes into your house and they want to look at your HVAC unit. They might actually even have a checklist, and they'll be looking down, asking the same questions to everybody. I just ask everybody, how does it make you feel? Does it make you feel valued? Do you think that this person is prepared at all to come into your house and have a conversation with you, or are you just the next stop on their route?
Yeah.
And you feel it, right? I mean, so what I would say is, I don't think there's a lot of preparation. And I do think that preparation, not only on the project and what they want to do, but more precisely why they want to do it, is important. And while in our business, I think everybody gets, I know what you want to do. You need a hardscape project. You want to have an outdoor kitchen. You need this landscaping or these walkways. They never really prepare for the client. And the big challenge in preparing for the client is, I think we would all agree, not everybody's the same. How I buy and how Chad buys may be totally different.
Yeah, it's
So if I
totally
sell to Chad the way that I buy, it might not resonate.
it's totally different. One of the calls we used to get to the office when I was an account manager, I'll admit it, was a little old lady that said, he just rushed me the whole time because I'm like, hey, what do you want to do? I'm going to tell you how to do this. Let's get it done. And it worked great for a lot of people. A couple personality types, they loved it. They needed someone to take charge. But, little Mrs. McGillicuddy wanted me to kind of walk around and help her identify every flower in her garden. And that would have made her feel special. And when I didn't do that, it was always like, there was always an issue. So I totally get that.
Yeah, we have a tendency, a lot of sales, and I always reflect on bad sales experiences. And I'll tell you, they bother me more now than they ever have since I got used in integrity selling. But a lot of folks just show up and they show up and throw up, or they tell and sell.
Yeah.
And what they really need to be doing is slowing down and asking questions and developing trust with the clients before they even get into the selling piece. Because people are defensive of salespeople. It's like, what are you going to do to me? And if you can shift that, the interaction to be one where the client feels, hey, this is somebody that wants to do something for me. They're focused in on me and not the transaction or the sale or the commission. just that little step in getting your mind right and being prepared when you come into that session makes all the difference in the world. Yet we don't do it.
Yeah. You had sent me a quote by Winston Churchill when we were talking about this, that failing to plan is planning to fail. And that is so true. So we want to talk about preparation and some of the practical ways, things that salespeople in the landscape industry should be preparing, and unpack that a little bit. Um, it sounds like what most people are doing just really isn't enough. So, what are some examples of the ways that people should be preparing for a sales appointment?
Well, it's a couple one. We'll definitely want to talk about this thing called a statement of intent, but there's some other things that you can do as well. So the call comes in. Let's imagine the client talks to your director of first impressions or somebody that screens the call to make sure that they're in our geography and that they want services that we can provide. Things that you can do to prepare is let's go look at Google Maps or Google Earth and see what the property looks like. My teams go and look at Zillow to see what the house sold for and to see pictures of it, mainly to try to understand what the style of the home is, how it might be decorated, etc. I would also say that they could go and look at LinkedIn about the person. And ideally, I want them to prepare for 4 different behavioral styles. If anybody here has done the DISC assessment, what we teach in integrity selling, very similar to that. There are 4 different personality types. There's a talker, and you know this person, right? They come up and pat you on the back, and if you ask them what time it is, they're going to tell you how to make a watch. And the big thing you got to do with them is they want to be recognized is big for them. They move kind of quickly. Your challenges with them are like this, keeping them bracketed in on what the specific dominant wants are for their project. Then you have a doer. The fellow that Chad and I met through is a hyper doer.
Yes.
They don't want fluffy prose. And
No.
I'm imagining some of the owners that are on this call would fall into this category.
Yeah.
They want the facts. I communicate with the gentleman that owns a business that Chad and I got introduced through in bullets and no more than 5. Right.
That's a good guideline.
So they want to move quickly. And it is about achievement. It's a big deal for the doers. Controllers are, I would say, you're kind of if you can imagine the quintessential chief financial officer. They're skeptical. They want to know all the details and they're risk averse. And they are results driven, just like the doers. And then you have the other ones, which are the supporters. And I use my mother as a prime example of this. They're very people oriented. They move very slowly. They're concerned that they're going to make the wrong choice, and they often delay. So if you don't go in thinking, I've got to recognize these behavioral styles, you're not going to know how to develop trust and rapport with these clients. That's the first step.
So how do you uncover that? By going to LinkedIn?
If they have a social media presence, they're probably going to be talkers, people oriented. If they are achievement driven, if you looked in LinkedIn, you saw doers, you might see a list of achievements. Controllers, you're going to know honestly by the handshake. They're going to be very reserved. They're not going to imagine that they might pinch you off. And they're probably going to have conversations with you like this with your arms crossed, again, because they're kind of skeptical. And you'll learn in the course of asking them questions that they're detail oriented. You're going to have to be able to provide detail in order to move the opportunity forward.
There's one thing you had talked about, going into the sales conversation, meeting them on the property or whatever, where you have a certain set of information. I call it lead intelligence. So I think all contractors, they will have the form that came through on the website, possibly a conversation they had with someone at the front desk. If those people are trained to, in that conversation, detect tone, pace, attitude, that sort of thing, and give more than just that basic information. They want a patio. And if they can give that to the salesperson, that probably helps them to maybe not step into it with a lot of assumptions, but at least step into it with things to look for. And one of the things that I love, like our clients, many of them use the sales portion of HubSpot, and they're able to look at the actual pages, videos, blog posts that people have looked at. If you're sending them a series of emails or marketing emails, you can see which emails they've opened, which ones they've clicked on, and the activity that people are already having before you even get to that conversation. And sometimes that's really revealing. If you see someone that is looking at a lot of cost articles if you see someone looking at all these case studies with outdoor kitchens and you see this theme and yeah, they want a patio, they want an outdoor kitchen, but I'm going to spend a little bit more time kind of pushing those hot buttons and asking more pointed questions about certain things in our conversation to see if they come alive during that. So those are probably good things to step into that conversation with too.
Great resources for sure.
Yeah.
And HubSpot, I run all of the companies that I work with on HubSpot, and it's been immensely helpful for all of us. I think the strongest thing that anybody can do is to go in with a prepared statement of intent. And I want everybody to think about that as being just like, this is the topic of today's meeting. I would go in and give you an example. Mr. Diller, I'm going to tell you today that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what we want to go through today. It's going to take about 30 to 60 minutes. And I'd like to start at the kitchen table where I'm going to ask you lots of questions about your project and your family and the things that you want to accomplish with your outdoor living experience. Then we will move outside and we'll go and look at the actual areas with our eyes. I'm going to take some photographs and some measurements. Then I'm going to reconvene with you inside, and we're going to talk about next actions. How does that sound to you? Now, that might sound long-winded, but I think what it does is it shows a respect for time, and that's important for everybody.
Yeah.
It shows that you have a plan. The fact that I said I wanted to start at the kitchen table shows that we have a process. And I would probably also add in that statement of intent, for the last 17 years, we've seen that this has worked effectively for us. They're going to, for controllers and supporters, are going to be like, okay, this is how they normally do things. And it invites them to say, I don't want to do that. And the doer might say, that's not going to work for me. Or I already know what I want to do.
Yeah.
And what I want you to do is to take notes on this and tell me how quickly we can get it done.
So essentially they're revealing their cards by the way they're responding to you, giving them that process. I've also found that, like, so I do this when I pre-qualify someone that wants to work with us. I get some information on the front end, and then the first thing I say is this: I have two goals today on this call. The first goal is to only take 30 minutes of your time, so I'm respecting that time. The second one, and I didn't hear you say this, and it would be interesting to see, and I guess it depends on the business model for the landscape company and how they operate. But the second thing I say is, when we get to the end of 30 minutes today, we're going to decide together if there's a mutual fit. And if there isn't, I'm totally fine with that.
Right.
I like to do that because it removes that this guy's going to persuade me, push me, coerce me. And there's an opportunity too that he might not want to work with me. And I
Right.
think from a salesperson perspective, that gives you an upper footing to let them know, listen, we might not be a good fit for you. I've seen people, and I can imagine this happening in a landscape conversation too, where they're almost trying to convince you why you should be working on their project. And it's not meant to be manipulative, but it's meant to kind of not appear to be desperate, because nobody likes to deal with desperate people.
Right. Exactly right. That's a terrific point that you made. I think one of the ways that you can take people from a defensive, here comes the salesperson trying to do something to me,
Yeah.
is just to tell them from the beginning, the reason I'm asking all these questions is I want to make sure that I'm the right fit to help you.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how this fits within being more customer focused. I know we had talked about, like, we want to know what their personality style is. We don't want to wing it and that sort of thing. But I wonder if there's some specific things or phrases that you think are just really wonderful to show a prospective client that you are being client focused and not focused on your own agenda. Like, are there phrases or questions that you're like, these are gold? Here's a couple golden ones.
Well, I think there's a couple of things you can do. Paraphrasing back to the client is really important. Generally, everybody's favorite sound is their own voice, and everybody's favorite topic is themselves. So when you're approaching the client, I always think about that first interaction should be you asking questions and then listening 80% of the time. So 20% asking questions, 80% listening, and listening intently. And then paraphrasing back to them, did I get this right? Or things like, tell me more about that. That was interesting. One of the key questions, there's a couple of them that I like to ask. I always ask them, what's driving you to make this decision now? In many cases, they may have been thinking about it for a long time. I'll give you a really fun example. I love this one. I was chatting with a lady, and she came to me and she was talking. She's like, I want to build a outdoor fire pit area with a seating wall. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Well, tell me about what you have now, tell your current situation. Well, I have a deck on the back of the house where my husband grills, and I'm worried that he's going to burn it down. And my grandkids come over to the house once a month with their parents after church. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And I asked some questions about our grandchildren and learned that they range in age from like 3 to 15. And I said, well, this seems like, understand why you want to create a fire pit, move their husband off of the deck, the wooden deck, into a fire pit area for grilling. But tell me a little bit about the seating wall. And she said, I probably have 10 more years with my grandchildren. And what I really want them to do is to create an environment where they will come over, and rather than see me once a month, that I can get them to 2 or 3 times a month, and they'll bring their friends. Her why, or emotional gap, had nothing really to do with getting her husband off the deck. What it had to do with is, I want to see my grandchildren. And if I could do this, I think it will help me increase. And she was, she had it measured. Because I asked her, like, how are you going to measure the success of the project? She says, if I see my grandchildren rather than 1 time, 3 times a month. So I thought that was great. So again, what's driving you to make the decision now? How are you going to measure success? I think those are great questions to ask. I always try to ask them to envision how they're going to use it. So on the seating wall, it was like, all right, do you want to have it just continuous all the way around, or do you want to create different seating areas? And you can see them start to envision it in their mind, and it becomes real. Well, I would like to have seating areas. You could have private conversations, or you could all be together. Asking questions that get them envisioning using it, I think, is important. My friend Ashby Perot at Southern Landscape Groups in Lynchburg, he always tells, if the people say, I want to create a spot to entertain, his next question is, how many people are at the table? Well, what do you mean? It's like, well, it's going to, I want to know how you're going to use the space, and it's going to tell me how big we need to build the patio. What size table were you going to have on it? There were questions that he would ask would be things like, what are your favorite colors in a landscaping design? Do you want it to bloom all time, all at once, or do you want color all year round? Just questions that really get them thinking, rather than just, okay, I want hydrangeas, check. There's no extra questions. I think just asking those, what makes a good question great is a terrific follow-up question. And it also tells the client that you're really interested in them. You're really trying to help them think about the vision that they want, and to figure out how we are going to execute on that. But many times when they've called you, that vision is not in stone.
Yeah. So just to recap a little bit, so proper preparation, we're talking about knowing yourself better, knowing that your process doesn't always work, learning to listen for things, doing some investigation beforehand to find out what information you could find out about that person or how they interacted so far in the sales process or marketing process. And a big part of that is asking good questions. And I've found in my life, I need to learn how to do this better personally too.
Yeah.
Asking good questions is an art. And then sometimes people get stuck on questions, and you have to learn different ways to phrase things. When we record case study videos with clients about their outdoor space, there's all kinds of phrases that are great. But one phrase that I love is, describe to me. And that's a good one too. So instead of you asking a question that could be kind of a short, concise answer, you can ask them to kind of paint a picture for you. Now, based on the personality, some of the people probably won't want to paint a picture for you. But if you say, yeah, I want to have my family over, you're talking about that grandkids. Describe to me what a perfect afternoon would look like if this space was exactly what you'd want.
Yeah.
And you might have that person says, oh, imagine the adults are sitting there. We've had dinner. Now the kids are playing in the yard and we can see them. The teenagers are hanging out over here at this spot. And we're all kind of together in that space. I've found that, like in sales conversations, one thing that I'm becoming more aware of, you get on a Zoom call with somebody and you have this awkward, like waiting for everybody to come. And everybody goes to like 2 or 3 like topics. They go to the weather. And every time I find myself doing it or I see someone else doing it, my team will tell you this too. They're like, oh, you're going to make Chad mad. So I'm like, there's something more important to talk about the weather. We get it. The sun shines, the rain falls, the snow comes. Yes, there's weather. I have it here too. But somehow people feel like that's connective, but it's not really connective. Even sports and that sort of thing sometimes just can't be connective and people stay on a surface level. I'm not suggesting landscape salespeople go and all of a sudden start having a therapy session with their new client. They don't have the rapport for that. But I found in my experience, if you can find something like if you're on the property, you can find something to complement,
Yeah.
that often leads to an interesting conversation. So if you see something of interest, like a boat in the driveway or something like that, you could really ask those questions and then maybe start getting them talking about something that's exciting to them. Or if you see a Blackstone grill in the backyard and it's sitting on that deck, you could say, what is your husband's favorite thing to grill? What do
Yeah.
you like to him to grill? And they might start kind of unpacking that experience a little bit more for you. So we need to do a better job at asking questions. And being prepared means you probably have to practice that or learn how to ask questions. I don't think it's something that comes natural for most people.
Right.
I struggle with it.
Yeah. And I think it actually is maybe a little bit harder for younger people. My sons are in their early 20s and they don't really struggle with it as much as some of their friends. It's just like trying to find some commonality. You might see something. The Blackstone Grill is a great example of that. You'll see something in the home or on the property that is interesting to you. And it's important to say, all right, that's interesting to me. I want to ask some questions about it. I personally cross my fingers that I'm going to run into when I get to the house, there's going to be a dog, right? I'm a dog person and I subscribe to Bill Murray's philosophy that I don't trust people that don't like dogs, but I trust every dog that doesn't like a person. So if I can bond with them over animals, which is important to me, I think that just helps establish that trust. I just naturally one of those folks that I'm interested. I'm just interested in learning about people and I'm interested in helping people. So if I go in with the mentality of that's what I want to do in this conversation, independent of whether or not I can help them, I think it just kind of brings the temperature down a little bit. And it just allows, if you take interest in people, they're naturally going to be interested in you.
Most of what we're talking about here, you talk about being a good salesperson. It reminds me a lot. A lot of us are sports enthusiasts, and you think about like the NFL and the off season and all the preparation that players are doing. It sounds to me what you're talking about is we need to focus on each individual player performing at their maximum capacity, and then the team works well together. And the problem is if you don't master the fundamentals, it doesn't matter how fast you are or how big you are, you have to master the fundamentals. And sometimes they're like these little small movements that people have to do. And then practices, they do them over and over and over and over again. And then when they get into these real life situations, it becomes subconscious. They just spring into action.
Exactly right. There's a difference between discipline and motivation. I mean, people are not disciplined. I mean, people are not motivated every day to go exercise. And if you, it's a former football player a couple ice ages ago in high school, I can still probably drop back 7 steps and throw the ball because I did it 1,000 times. It's
Right.
committing things into your subconscious and good habits take repetition. You know, just making sure that you're committed to do that. It's football season, and you can see some of these athletes that were holding out. I won't name any names, but they're. I watched him on Monday night, and so he didn't come to the preseason practices. He was rusty, right? He dropped a touchdown pass. It was right in his hands, and you would think that well, that can happen at any point. But the fact that he hadn't been doing those preseason workouts and likely not doing the drills with his team every day, that he maybe lost a step or it just wasn't second nature for that ball to stick in his hands. So what I encourage the sales folks to do is to create a pre-call plan. And that pre-call plan would be research on the client, like and making sure that not just the project, but the client. Project is equally as important. Coming up with some sort of way to determine these are the questions I'm going to ask if it's a talker. This might be my first play or my first question to a client that is a doer. And also for controllers and supporters, the same thing. And then to develop that statement of intent. Show up, be intentional about your preparation, and show up to the call with a purpose and state that purpose to the client. Stephen Covey talks about always beginning with the end in mind. Imagine that that first call goes well. What's the goal for the meeting? What are the next steps? And the other thing I would tell them is make sure that you're asking for the next step in the call continuum. So it goes well with Chad and I. We talked about the project. Before I left, I might say something like this. I want to set up a time to have a Zoom meeting with you in 5 days. And it's going to take 15 minutes. But I need to think a little bit more about your project, and I need to talk to the county to see what we can do. And we'll get back together, and I might just put together 4 little slides that says these are the dominant things that you wanted that have to happen, and these are the like to haves. Here's a general overview, a wide budget range of what it might cost. And then at the end of that meeting, I want you to move into design agreement or to a retainer on the design build project. I need to think about that, right? I need to be intentional in moving towards that. And then conversely, if I get in there and I realize that we are not the right fit for the client, it's incumbent upon me to tell them so and to maybe point them in another direction if I can.
Great preparation individually, but also from an organizational perspective. Like, you don't have salespeople that all consistently do this if you don't have, back to that sports analogy, a great coach that holds his players or her players accountable and measures the things and looks at them and repacks the game film and goes over, like, how could we have made this better in the future? And that all is preparation. It's deliberate. It's something that has to get measured on a continuous basis.
Yeah.
This is the start of like a huge conversation about what we can do to be better salespeople in the landscape industry. I really appreciate some of the insights that you shared. And I brought TM on because one of the things that we're going to start doing with landscape leadership in the past, we've been a marketing agency. We've helped with sales technology, but we haven't done any sales coaching or training. And TM and we've been talking over the last 3, 4 months about being able to offer something like this to clients. So, do you want to tell them a little bit about integrity selling and what the format is like, what that training looks like, and how organizations could benefit from that?
I'll just kind of explain it what it is for me and for the clients I teach, the value that gives the common sales language for your team. There's a stated sales process, so you'll know where things are in the sales process. But at its core, this is a study in human behavior. How do I adapt and speak to people in their preferred buying language? So the thing that we do with integrity selling is it's one on-site 8-hour course where it's going to be through drinking from the fire hose. We're going to go through all of the curriculum. And then the best part about it is it's such a lot of information to take, right? It's going to be exciting. You guys are going to like what you hear, but you're going to retain about 20% of it. Then we move into 8 consecutive weekly meetings that last an hour and a half that we do by Zoom, where we break down the 8 Inc process. 8 Inc is AIDINC, and it stands for approach, interview, demonstration. It's validate, how to validate yourself, your business, and your products, how to handle negotiations or objections, and then finally it's the close. So we break those steps down into 8 meetings, and we actually take real life experience from the prior week with each section. Rather than role play, we call it real play.
I like that.
And what you'll see is that about the third, you'll start to really see your teams and even yourself, it'll start to kind of get into your subconscious. And I will tell you, I've taught a lot of very seasoned sales and sales design people. They all come back to me and they would say at the end, because, I kind of intuitively knew these things, but it's great to think about being intentional about them. And I have a fellow that just finished class last week. Jason and I are of similar ages. He's been a landscape designer for 28 years or more. He closed his biggest sale of his entire career. It was one of those numbers that had 2 commas in it. It was a
Wow.
big project. Jason's kind of a natural supporter controller. He said, if I didn't intentionally think about how I was going to communicate with this person that was a doer, I'm not sure that they would have had the confidence to buy from me. That's exactly what I'm after as a trainer. And that's exactly what I want from my salespeople, is for them to say, hey, I got something from this that practically improved my performance. What we've also seen is while the number of new opportunities may have waned a little bit now that we're in an election year, for the companies that I manage as a fractional sales manager, we've seen our close rate go from 30% to above 50%. And I think it can go higher than that.
That's great.
So those are the advantages. The way that it's 8 hours on site, it's 8 hour and a half consecutive weekly meetings as follow-ups, and then you graduate. And then you'll have a management tool because you'll all be on the same language, the integrity selling language. It makes for sales managers, it's nice to have that system in place, that infrastructure that you can hand over to somebody and say, this is how you run the place.
Great. Well, that's what we're about here at the podcast, is practical information to help change your lawn care landscaping company. TM, this has been great. I hope that this conversation has really helped you to learn to think about how can your team, individuals, or your organization prepare better to go into sales conversations so you close way more with less aggravation. If you like today's podcast, you love conversations like this, do me a favor and forward this to one of your industry peers that you think could benefit from that. Thanks for connecting with us. If you'd like to check out more about landscape leadership or TM, kind of the best ways you can do that is you can look for Chad Diller or TM Dickinson on LinkedIn, or you can also visit the landscapeleadership.com website. You get a lot of information there too. Thanks so much, TM. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Have a really great one.